What if I told you that your greatest source of shame, your vulnerability, is actually your greatest source of power? We spend our lives running from the very thing that could set us free. We exhaust ourselves trying to appear invincible while our souls cry out for authenticity. The most profound crisis facing us isn't economic, political, or environmental. It's our collective inability to be real with ourselves and each other. Every meeting where truth goes unspoken. Every relationship where feelings remain hidden. Every moment where authenticity is sacrificed for approval. These are the real casualties of our war against vulnerability. Have you ever noticed how we spend our entire lives running? Running from pain, running from judgment, running from our own shadows. We build walls so high that even we forget what's behind them. Tonight, I want to talk about something that might make you uncomfortable. Something that society has taught us to avoid at all costs: being vulnerable. You're probably sitting there right now, thinking about all the times you've armored yourself against the world. The moments when you smiled and said, "I'm fine," while your heart was breaking. The opportunities you let slip away. Because taking a risk meant exposing yourself to potential failure or ridicule. The relationships that withered because you couldn't bring yourself to say those three terrifying words: "I need help." Let me tell you a truth that might shake you to your core. Your greatest strength lies precisely in those places where you feel most vulnerable. The very things you're trying to hide, to protect, to keep safely tucked away from the world's judgmental eyes. Those are your superpowers in disguise. Think about water for a moment. Water, in its seemingly vulnerable state, can penetrate the hardest rock, not through force, but through gentle, persistent vulnerability. It doesn't try to be something it's not. It doesn't armor itself. It simply is. And in that state of pure authenticity, it reshapes. We've created a world where vulnerability is seen as weakness, where showing emotion is considered unprofessional, where asking for help is viewed as incompetence. But what if I told you that this collective armor we've built is actually suffocating us? What if our desperate attempts to appear strong are exactly what's making us weak? When was the last time you were deeply moved by someone pretending to be perfect? When was the last time you felt a genuine connection with someone wearing an impenetrable mask of success? Never. Because we don't connect with perfection. We connect with humanness, with authenticity, with the raw and real moments that make us who we are. The most profound connections in your life have likely come from moments of shared vulnerability. Think about it. Think about that friend who trusted you enough to break down in front of you. Think about that mentor who admitted they didn't have all the answers. Think about that parent who apologized for making a mistake. These moments of vulnerability didn't diminish these people in your eyes. They elevated them. But here's where it gets interesting and perhaps a bit uncomfortable. While we admire vulnerability in others, we resist it in ourselves. We applaud the courage of others while denying ourselves the same freedom to be authentic. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we bought into the grand illusion that we need to have it all figured out. Let me challenge that belief right now. Look around this room. Every single person here is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Every single person here has doubts, fears, and insecurities they're trying to hide. Every single person here is laid awake at night wondering if they're good enough, smart enough, strong enough. And every single person here has, at some point, felt utterly alone in these feelings. But here's the paradox. The moment you share your struggle, the moment you dare to be vulnerable, something magical happens. Your vulnerability becomes a bridge, connecting you to others who have felt the same way. Your openness becomes an invitation for authentic connection. Your courage to show up as you are becomes permission for others to do the same. I've seen rooms full of strangers transform into communities of support simply because one person dared to say, "I'm struggling." I've witnessed decades-old barriers between people crumble because someone had the courage to say, "I was wrong." I've seen lives change direction because someone finally admitted, "I don't know what I'm doing, and I need help." These moments of vulnerability aren't signs of weakness. They're demonstrations of extraordinary courage. It takes far more strength to remove your armor than to hide behind it. It takes far more courage to say, "I don't know," than to pretend you have all the answers. It takes far more power to be vulnerable than to be invulnerable. But let's be real. This isn't easy. Being vulnerable when all you want to do is hide requires a kind of courage that doesn't come naturally to most of us. It requires us to confront our deepest fears. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. It requires us to challenge everything we've been taught about strength and weakness. The journey toward vulnerability often begins with small steps. Maybe it's admitting to a colleague that you're struggling with a project instead of pretending everything's fine. Maybe it's telling your partner about a fear that's been haunting you instead of brushing it off. Maybe it's simply allowing yourself to cry when you need to instead of holding it all in. These might seem like small acts, but they're revolutionary in their own way. Each time you choose vulnerability over protection, authenticity over perfection, you're not just changing your own life, you're creating ripples that affect everyone around you. You're showing others that it's safe to be human. You're demonstrating that strength isn't about being invulnerable. It's about having the courage to remain open, even when everything in you wants to close up and hide. You're proving that the most powerful connections we can have with others come not from our perfection, but from our willingness to share our imperfections. And here's something crucial to understand. Vulnerability isn't about oversharing or emotional dumping. It's not about laying all your cards on the table at once or sharing every detail of your life with everyone you meet. True vulnerability is discerning, intentional, and purposeful. It's about showing up authentically in moments that matter, with people who matter, in ways that foster genuine connection and growth. Sometimes the hardest person to be vulnerable with is ourselves. We're masters at self-deception, experts at maintaining the illusion of control. We tell ourselves stories about who we are and who we should be. Stories that keep us safely tucked away from the edges of our comfort zones. But what if those very edges are where our greatest potential lies? Think about the conversations you have with yourself, the internal dialogue that runs through your mind when you're alone. How much of it is authentic and how much is scripted? How often do you allow yourself to acknowledge your true feelings, your deepest fears, your wildest dreams? How often do you give yourself permission to be imperfect, to be uncertain, to be simply you? The armor we wear doesn't just keep others out. It keeps us trapped inside. It prevents us from growing, from exploring, from becoming who we're truly meant to be. Every time we choose protection over vulnerability, we sacrifice a piece of our... Every time we choose hiding over showing up, we deny ourselves the opportunity for genuine connection and growth. Let me share something profound about vulnerability that most people miss. It's not just about emotional exposure. It's about power, real power, the kind of power that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being unafraid to show it to the world. The kind of power that can't be taken away because it's not based on pretense or performance. When you dare to be vulnerable, you step into your authentic power. You no longer need to waste energy maintaining facades or managing impressions. You're free to direct that energy toward what truly matters: growth, connection, purpose, impact. Consider the energy it takes to maintain your defenses. The mental and emotional resources you expend trying to appear invulnerable. What could you accomplish if you redirected that energy towards something meaningful? What mountains could you move if you weren't constantly rebuilding your walls? But here's where many of us get stuck. We confuse vulnerability with weakness because we've never learned the difference between being vulnerable and being victimized. Being vulnerable doesn't mean being a victim. It doesn't mean letting everyone into your life or accepting harmful behavior. It means having the courage to be seen, truly seen, while maintaining healthy boundaries. Healthy vulnerability comes from a place of self-worth, not self-doubt. It comes from knowing that your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it. It comes from understanding that your wounds, your struggles, your imperfections are not defects to be hidden, but rather parts of your story that make you uniquely qualified to connect with and help others. The truth is, your vulnerability is a gift to others. And when you dare to show up authentically, you create a space for others to do the same. When you have the courage to say, I'm struggling, you give others permission to acknowledge their own struggles. When you dare to be imperfect, you make it safe for others to be imperfect too. Think about the people who have impacted your life most deeply. Weren't they the ones who showed you their humanity? The ones who weren't afraid to be real with you? the ones who trusted you enough to let you see behind their carefully constructed facades. That's the power of vulnerability. It creates connections that go beyond surface-level interactions. It creates bonds that can withstand the storms of life. It creates communities where people feel seen, heard, and valued for who they truly are, not for who they pretend to be. But vulnerability isn't just about relationships with others. It's about your relationship with yourself. It's about having the courage to look in the mirror and acknowledge what you see, both the beautiful and the broken parts. It's about being honest with yourself about your fears, your dreams, your mistakes, and your victories. When you embrace vulnerability with yourself, something remarkable happens. The voice of self-judgment begins to soften. The need for perfection begins to fade. The constant pressure to prove your worth begins to dissolve. You start to understand that your worth isn't determined by your achievements or your appearance or your bank account. It's inherent in your humanity. This internal vulnerability creates a foundation for authentic living. When you can be honest with yourself, you can be honest with others. When you can accept your own imperfections, you can accept the imperfections of others. When you can show compassion to yourself, you can show genuine compassion to others. But let's address the elephant in the room. Vulnerability is scary. It's terrifying to let down your guard when you've spent years, perhaps decades, building it up. It's frightening to show your true self when you're not sure how others will react. It's daunting to step into the unknown when the familiar, even if uncomfortable, feels safer. That fear is normal. That fear is human. That fear is a sign that you're on the edge of something important, because the things that scare us most are often the things that have the potential to transform us most profoundly. The path to vulnerability isn't about eliminating fear. It's about learning to move forward despite it. It's about understanding that the discomfort of vulnerability is temporary, but the cost of hiding is permanent. Every time you choose protection over authenticity, you reinforce the belief that you need to hide to be acceptable. Every time you choose armor over openness, you distance yourself further from genuine connection. Let's talk about what happens in your body when you're avoiding vulnerability. Notice the tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your chest, the shallow breath that comes with constant vigilance. Your body knows when you're not being true to yourself. It carries the weight of every mask you wear, every truth you suppress, every emotion you deny. Now take a deep breath. Feel the expansion in your chest. Feel the release as you exhale. This is what vulnerability feels like. It's an opening, a releasing, a return to your natural state. Just like your body knows when you're hiding, it knows when you're being authentic. It rewards authenticity with ease, with flow, with a sense of rightness that no amount of protection can provide. But vulnerability isn't just about feeling, it's about choice. It's about consciously choosing to remain open when everything in you wants to close. It's about choosing authenticity even when pretense might seem easier. It's about choosing truth even when lies would be more comfortable. These choices aren't made once say. They're made moment by moment, day by day. In every interaction, in every relationship, in every situation that challenges your comfort zone, you have the opportunity to choose vulnerability over protection, authenticity over armor, growth over safety. Sometimes vulnerability looks like saying, I don't know, in a room full of experts. Sometimes it looks like admitting a mistake when it would be easier to make excuses. Sometimes it looks like sharing your dreams with someone who might not understand them. Sometimes it looks like standing alone in your truth when it would be more comfortable to hide in the crowd. But here's what most people don't realize about vulnerability. It's not just about what you share, it's about how you show up in the world. It's about being present with your whole self, not just the parts you think are acceptable. It's about bringing your full humanity to every interaction, every relationship, every moment. Think about the last time you felt fully alive, fully present, fully engaged. Chances are it was a moment when you dropped your defenses and allowed yourself to be fully in the experience. Whether it was laughing until you cried, loving with your whole heart, or pursuing a dream that scared you. Those moments of aliveness come when we dare to be vulnerable. The irony is that we often avoid vulnerability because we want to avoid pain. But in doing so, we also avoid joy. We can't selectively numb emotions. When we armor ourselves against hurt, we also armor ourselves against love. When we protect ourselves from failure, we also protect ourselves from success. When we hide from judgment, we also hide from connection. This is where the real transformation begins. When we understand that vulnerability isn't just about emotional exposure, it's about emotional freedom. It's about liberating ourselves from the exhausting task of maintaining our defenses. It's about releasing ourselves from the prison of perfectionism. It's about allowing ourselves to be human with all the messiness and beauty that entails. Consider what might change in your life if you allowed yourself to be vulnerable. What relationships might deepen? What opportunities might open up? What parts of yourself might you discover? What dreams might you dare to pursue? The cost of invulnerability is too high. It costs us our connections, our creativity, our capacity for joy. It costs us our ability to grow, to learn, to become who we're meant to be. It costs us our chance at living a full, authentic me. But here's the beautiful truth. You already have everything you need to be vulnerable. You don't need special training or unique skills. You don't need to wait until you're stronger or wiser or more prepared. You just need to be willing to show up as you are, to share your truth, to let yourself be seen. Start small. Choose one area of your life where you've been hiding and dare to be a little more authentic. Choose one relationship where you've been guarded and dare to be a little more open. Choose one truth you've been avoiding and dare to acknowledge it. Remember, vulnerability isn't about dramatic declarations or public confessions. It's about small, consistent choices to be real, to be authentic, to be human. It's about choosing truth over pretense, connection over protection, growth over comfort. As you sit here now, feeling the weight of these truths, you might be experiencing a mixture of recognition and resistance. Part of you knows the power of vulnerability, has experienced its transformative potential. Another part of you might be thinking of all the reasons why this won't work in your life, why your situation is different, why you need to maintain your defenses. Listen to that resistance. Acknowledge it. But don't let it stop you, because that resistance is precisely where your greatest opportunity for growth lies. That discomfort you're feeling. It's the sensation of your comfort zone expanding. That fear you're experiencing, it's the feeling of old patterns beginning to shift. Consider the possibility that your need for control, your desire for certainty, your addiction to safety might be the very things holding you back from the life you're meant to live. Consider that your carefully constructed defenses might be protecting you from the very experiences that could lead to your greatest joy, your deepest connections, your most meaningful achievements. When we choose vulnerability, we choose growth. We choose possibility. We choose life in all its messy, beautiful, unpredictable glory. But this choice isn't made once. It's made again and again in moments big and small, in situations comfortable and challenging. It's made when you admit you're wrong instead of defending your position. It's made when you share your feelings instead of hiding behind logic. It's made when you ask for help instead of struggling alone. It's made when you express gratitude instead of maintaining cool detachment. It's made when you show up with an open heart instead of a protected ego. The beauty of vulnerability is that it's contagious. When one person dares to be real, it creates a ripple effect. Others feel safe to lower their own defenses. Authentic connections begin to form. Real conversations start to happen. Communities begin to transform. Think about the impact you could have by choosing vulnerability. Think about how your willingness to be real might inspire others to do the same. Think about how your courage to show up authentically might create spaces where others feel safe to do this. But vulnerability isn't just about emotional exposure. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about knowing when to share and when to maintain boundaries. It's about understanding the difference between vulnerability that leads to connection and It's about discerning who has earned the right to hear your story and who hasn't. True vulnerability comes from a place of strength, not weakness. It comes from knowing your worth isn't dependent on others' approval. It comes from understanding that your value isn't diminished by your imperfections. It comes from recognizing that your wounds, when acknowledged and healed, become sources of wisdom. And the path to vulnerability often requires us to confront our deepest fears. The fear of rejection, the fear of judgment, the fear of not being enough. But here's what's fascinating about these fears. They lose their power when we bring them into the light, when we dare to acknowledge them, to share them, to see them for what they are. Just thoughts, just feelings, not facts. What if your fear of vulnerability is actually fear of your own power? What if your resistance to being seen is actually resistance to seeing yourself? What if your attachment to control is actually preventing you from experiencing the very things you're trying to control? The journey to vulnerability requires courage, yes, but it also requires compassion, especially self-compassion. It requires understanding that you're not meant to be perfect. You're meant to be real. You're not meant to have it all figured out. You're meant to be growing, learning, evolving. Each time you choose vulnerability over protection, you're not just changing your own life. You're contributing to a larger change. You're helping to create a world where authenticity is valued over perfection, where connection is prioritized over protection, where being real is more important than being right. This is the power of vulnerable living. It transforms not just individuals, but relationships, communities, societies. It creates spaces where people can show up as they are, where differences can be bridged through authentic connection, where real change can happen because people are willing to be real with each other. Look around you right now. Every person you see is carrying their own burden of unspoken truths, unexpressed emotions, unfulfilled dreams. Every person you meet is hoping somewhere deep inside for permission to be real, to be seen, to be accepted as they are. You can be the one who creates that permission. You can be the one who shows that it's safe to be human. You can be the one who demonstrates that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the ultimate expression of courage. But this journey isn't about grand gestures or dramatic revelations. It's about small, everyday choices. It's about choosing authenticity in ordinary moments. It's about being real in regular conversations. It's about showing up fully in simple interactions. Maybe it starts with a genuine answer when someone asks how you're doing. Maybe it begins with admitting uncertainty in a meeting. Maybe it starts with sharing a dream you've kept hidden. Maybe it begins with apologizing for a mistake you've been defending. The beautiful thing about vulnerability is that it doesn't require special circumstances or perfect timing. It only requires willingness to be seen, willingness to be real, willingness to connect authentically. As you leave this room today, you have a choice. You can continue wearing your armor, maintaining your defenses, hiding behind your carefully constructed facade. Or you can begin the journey of vulnerable living, one small choice at a time, one authentic moment at a time, one real connection at a time. Remember this. Your vulnerability is not a liability. It's your greatest asset. Your sensitivity is not a weakness. It's your superpower. Your authenticity is not a risk. It's your pathway to genuine connection and meaningful impact. The world doesn't need more people pretending to be perfect. It needs more people willing to be real. It doesn't need more masks and facades. It needs more authenticity and truth. It doesn't need more armor and protection. It needs more openness and connection. You might be thinking that this sounds beautiful but impossible in your reality. You might be considering all the reasons why vulnerability won't work in your life, your relationships, your workplace. But consider this. What if those very reasons, those very challenges, are exactly why vulnerability? What if your workplace needs someone to demonstrate that it's okay to admit mistakes? What if your relationships need someone to show that it's safe to express feelings? What if your community needs someone to prove that it's possible to be both strong and vulnerable? The time for hiding is over. The cost of protection is too high. The price of pretense is too steep. Your life is waiting for you to show up fully, to engage authentically, to connect genuinely. Your vulnerability is not just about you. It's about creating a ripple effect of authenticity that can transform relationships, communities, and ultimately the world. Every time you choose to be vulnerable, you make it safer for others to do the same. Every time you dare to be real, you create space for others to embrace their own authenticity. The choice is yours now. Will you continue to hide behind your carefully constructed walls? Or will you dare to step into the power of vulnerable living? Will you keep wearing the mask of perfection? Or will you embrace the beauty of your authentic self? Remember, the journey to vulnerability isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming more fully yourself. It's not about acquiring something new. It's about releasing what no longer serves you. It's not about learning new skills. It's about unlearning old patterns that keep you small and hidden. Your story matters. Your truth matters. Your authentic self matters. The world needs your vulnerability, your realness, your humanity. It needs your courage to be seen, your willingness to be real, your commitment to authentic living. I challenge you, start today. Start now. Choose one small act of vulnerability. Make one authentic connection. Share one genuine truth. Take one step toward being more fully yourself. Because in the end, the question isn't whether you can afford to be vulnerable. The question is whether you can afford not to be. The question isn't whether vulnerability is safe. The question is whether hiding is costing you more than you're willing to pay. Your journey to vulnerable living begins now. Not when you're ready. Not when it's safe. Not when you've figured everything out. Now, in this moment, with this, the world is waiting for your authentic self. Your life is waiting for your genuine presence. Your destiny is waiting for your vulnerable courage. The time is now. The person is you. The choice is yours. Let your walls come down. Let your truth shine through. Let your authentic self emerge. Because in your vulnerability lies your greatest strength. In your authenticity lies your greatest power. In your realness lies your greatest impact. The world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your truth. It doesn't need your protection. It needs your presence. It doesn't need your pretense. It needs your reality. You are enough, exactly as you are. Your vulnerability is your gift to the world. Your authenticity is your offering to humanity. The time for hiding is over. The time for vulnerability is now. Rise up, show up, be real. The world is waiting.